In this screencast, we will cover adjectives and verbs. So we need adjectives to help us describe things for which no exact nouns exist and to describe all of the things for which we do not know the exact noun. Adjectives also help us to express the subtle differences between very similar things. But adjectives do more than just describe. Adjectives actually modify nouns or pronouns. To modify means to change. So what does that mean? Well, imagine a frozen summit. Now, think about the frozen summit of a mountain until you can see it in your mind. It might look something like that. Now, imagine a political summit. Does the second adjective, political, modify the image you have in your mind? It should, because you should see something like that. Now, some definitions say that adjectives describe nouns, but really, modify is a better way to put it because the nouns truly are modified or changed by their adjectives. You'll notice that an adjective is always part of a binary system, sort of like a double star or a planet with a moon. The presence of an adjective implies the presence of a noun or a pronoun. A noun can do without an adjective, but an adjective cannot exist without a noun or pronoun. So if it isn't modifying a noun or pronoun, it isn't an adjective. Now, adjectives can come in what we call 3 degrees, which really just refers to the level intensity that they're conveying. So we have positive, which is sort of like your baseline, comparative, which is when you're comparing two things, and superlative, which is when you're comparing 3 or more things. So for instance, you could have something that's cold, which would be positive. You could have something that's colder, which would be comparative, because now we're comparing scene 1 and scene 2. Or you could have something that's the coldest, which is now comparing 3 at least things. It's also important to note that proper adjectives come from proper nouns. So, like the noun England turns into the proper adjective English, or Rome makes Roman. When you convert a proper noun to a proper adjective, you retain the capitalization. So that's why the school subjects like history and mathematics are not capitalized because they're just generic subjects. They're not specific classes. But English and German, even if they're listed as classes, would be capitalized because they're made from the proper names of countries. Now, we're also going to talk about articles, which are a subcategory of adjectives. So there are 3 articles, the, a, and an. The is what we call the definite article because it refers to definite specific nouns. A and an, on the other hand, are what we call the indefinite articles because they refer to single but unspecified person or things. So think about geometry, right? Every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. Similarly, every article is an adjective, but not every adjective is an article. Articles, the, a, and an, are examples of how little things can mean a lot in reading, writing, and communicating. What if Suzanne Collins had titled her book A Hunger Game instead of The Hunger Games? The indefinite article a would make it sound much less dramatic. In that case, it's just a game or fight to the death, not the one and only game or fight to the death that will determine the fate of civilization, or something like that. And that about wraps up adjectives. So, moving on to verbs. Every sentence has to have a subject or a noun or pronoun that the sentence is about, and it has to have a predicate or the verb that expresses what that subject is doing. The verb, or the predicate, as we will call it at the parts of a sentence level, is always about the subject. Now, there are 2 types of verbs that we're really concerned with. If the verb is an action verb, then it is showing some sort of action, which can sometimes be an action on a direct object. For example, I could say Beethoven composed the symphony. That would be called a transitive action verb because the composing is actually happening on the symphony. You could also have an action verb that shows a simple action that doesn't affect a direct object, like Beethoven composed. That's an intransitive verb, but it's still an action verb because it's showing some sort of action. Don't worry about the difference between transitive and intransitive now. We'll get that when we talk about direct objects at level 2. The basic thing to know is that if you can do it, it's an action verb, like run, sneeze, cook, anything like that. Now, the other type of verb that we'll come across a lot is a linking verb. And a linking verb links a subject to a subject complement, although that's kind of a circular definition that's really jargony with grammar stuff. So think about it this way. A linking verb really expresses a state of being. So if you can't do it, it's likely a linking verb, like am, is, was, or seemed. If it's not something you can act out, it's probably a linking verb. Now, verbs have what we call four principal parts, and all verb forms are made out of these four primary forms that each verb possesses. These forms are the infinitive, the present participle, the past, and the past participle. Now, before you start madly trying to get all this down in your notes, stop stressing, because I'm not concerned that you memorize the four parts of verbs. That's not really important here. But what I want you to recognize is that verbs can be tricky because they take different forms. So understanding the basic form of verbs can help you to identify them. A verb that follows the word to is part of an infinitive, always and forever. A verb that ends in ing and shows action is what we call a present participle. A verb that ends in ed and shows action that has already occurred is in the past form. And a verb that follows a helping verb like have or will have, ends in ed, and shows action is a past participle. Of course, because it's English, there are also a variety of irregular verbs. These weirdos you just sort of get a feel for the more you read and write. And if you're ever not sure of the form a verb should be taking, whether it's regular or irregular, check a dictionary. In addition to the four principal parts, we also talk about verbs having tenses. Technically, there are 6. 3 are considered ordinary and 3 are considered perfect. We're not going to worry about the perfect tenses here, and you will never have a pop quiz question on this, so don't stress. But here's what you do need to know. A verb tense is all about indicating time. Verb tenses just act as markers to convey additional information about the ideas in our sentences. In English, we focus on past, present, and future. The perfect tenses require helping verbs. The ordinary ones do not, and that's kind of the key point. Although past, present, future seems like really common sense to us, that's just because that's what we are accustomed to in English. Some languages don't have a past or future. Some languages have even more specific tenses. Languages in East Asia, for example, have grammatical markers to indicate the shape of what they're talking about. And Romance languages like Spanish indicate the gender of nouns as being masculine or feminine. So again, don't worry about memorizing these tenses or charts. I care about how you use the verbs, not that you can name them. In our writing, it's best to stick to one tense. When you're narrating a story, it's common to use the past tense. When you're analyzing a work of literature, we like you to use the present tense. When you're setting goals, you can use the future tense. And when you mix up the tenses, it can be confusing for your reader, so just be sure to stay on top of them. So, in a simple sense, the verb stands alone as a single word to make the simple predicate. But in a compound sense, the main verb is supplemented by what we call an auxiliary or helping verb to construct the tense. And that's what we have up here in this green sentence. By the time he was 5, Mozart had composed his minuet and trio in G major. So in this example, had is the helping verb that constructs the past perfect tense. Our main verb is composed. In order to show that Mozart finished the composing of this piece, we add that had in there. Seriously, listen to this. Seriously, he was 5. I don't know about you, but I couldn't even plunk out Twinkle Twinkle when I was 5. In fact, that's me when I was about 5. Yes, I am holding up a cross-stitched sweatshirt about school that I am clearly very excited to wear. And if ever there were a picture of someone born to be a teacher, this is probably it. But it is definitely not a picture of any sort of musical prodigy. Anyway, before we wrap up, I just want to point out at the bottom here this list of helping verbs. They include these common ones: can, could, may, might, must, ought to, shall, should, will, and would. But then I also listed forms of be, do, and have, and that was just for space purposes. So the be verbs can take these forms: am, is, was, were, be, being, been. The do verbs can take these forms: does, do, did. And the have verbs can take these forms: has, have, had, and having.